The words landed not like a statement, but a punchline, the sort of careless, polished dart people toss across a linen-draped table when the third bottle of wine is poured and reputations are being burnished like silver. "She's pretending to be staff," my mother stage whispered, her voice a conspiratorial blade. Loud enough that the woman beside her, a silk-clad vulture, blinked and leaned in, hungry for the spectacle. My father's laugh was a cannon shot of delight, the kind that makes strangers at other tables turn and smile, unknowingly complicit. "Can you believe our daughter?" he boomed, his gesture encompassing my uniform. "Playing at service work, a summer of slumming it before the real world begins." I froze. A statue in a starched white shirt and a pristine apron, the circular tray in my hands becoming an anvil. On it, a perfect bruschetta trembled on its linen napkin, a tiny world about to shatter. The restaurant hummed around our table, a symphony of low conversation, the melodic clink of sterling silver on bone china, the chef's distant guttural bark from the kitchen. I, Maya Lin, summa cum laude in business administration, 24 years old, had spent the last 6 months meticulously unlearning the arrogance my degree had bestowed. I had learned how to carry a tray laden with crystal through a crowded room without a single wobble. I had learned how to hold 12 complex cocktail orders in my head while smiling, and how to read the subtle ecosystem of a dining room, the raised eyebrow, the empty glass, the quiet tension of a couple not speaking. They saw the uniform and deemed it a costume, a charming temporary charade. Business school had filled my head with elegant theories on market fluctuations, financial models, and hostile mergers. But none of those glossy textbooks contained a chapter on what to do when your own father uses your ambition as a punchline to entertain his friends, reducing a deliberate, calculated grind into a frivolous game. That particular curriculum I had to write for myself. After the cap and gown were packed away, while my classmates flooded into corner offices with glass views, I charted a different course. I took 3 jobs. Evenings were here, in the hushed, punishing world of fine dining. Mornings were spent in the stark light of my apartment doing freelance market analysis for small, ambitious hospitality firms nobody had heard of yet. And late into the night, I drafted a business plan, the pages smelling faintly of bitter espresso and pure, unadulterated stubbornness. I learned about real revenue streams between dinner services. And I mastered negotiation tactics, not in a boardroom, but while bussing plates, navigating the fragile egos of chefs, and the calculated generosity of big spenders. Every sneer, every condescending "sweetheart" from a patron, every laugh from my parents' table, it all became fuel, meticulously logged and converted into a colder, harder resolve. The revenge would not be a scene, it would be a balance sheet. And I was ensuring its bottom line would be utterly devastating. The moment my father rose and summoned the manager with a curt, confident wave, I braced for the familiar script. I expected the hushed, apologetic tones, the subtle pressure to clear up the misunderstanding, and the subsequent week of tense, silent breakfasts where my ambitions would be the uninvited guest at the table. But Mr. Alvaro, the manager, did not walk over with the hesitant gait of someone about to deliver an apology. He moved with a calm, grounded authority forged over 20 years of handling every crisis a dining room could offer. He listened to my father's condescending spiel, his face an impassive mask. Then he turned his gaze to me, not with pity, but with a quiet, professional acknowledgement. He looked back at my parents and said, his voice clear and carrying, "Maya works here. She's on shift tonight." A wave of relief, so potent it felt like warmth, washed over the cold knot of dread in my stomach. For a single suspended second, my parents' faces were a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance, a flicker of vindication that I was indeed their credentialed daughter, immediately chased by a dawning, unsettling worry that their narrative was crumbling. Then my father's voice sharpened, thinning into a blade of accusation. "You lied to us," he hissed, the words meant only for our small, tense circle. "You've been pretending this whole time." Pretending. The word echoed, hollowing out all my effort. Not working, not learning the intricate dance of supply chains from the ground up, not saving every spare dollar with a fierce singular purpose, just pretending. Their campaign of erasure began subtly, like a landscaper who tires of a path and methodically drags stakes into new soil. Invitations to family functions dried up, the anecdotes they told at parties were meticulously edited, my role written out of the family script. At my cousin's lavish engagement dinner, they informed everyone I was backpacking through Europe, a chosen bohemian absence deemed far more respectable than the gritty truth of my honest labor. At summer barbecues, my apron-burdened silhouette became a reliable punchline, a cautionary tale about wasted potential. When I refused their help, a neutered junior analyst role in a friend's firm, offered like a consolation prize, their exasperated patience finally hardened into open contempt. "Quit this silly charade," my mother pleaded, once her voice dripping with a kindness that felt like a command. "Let us fix your future." So, I started keeping a different kind of ledger. It wasn't just the petty accounts of insults and slights, though I logged those too for fuel. This was a record of hours worked, contacts made, and capital accumulated. I saved every single paycheck, refusing to let humiliation press me into denial or frivolous spending. I took notes on every effective manager I worked under, cataloged the menu items that sold fastest and why, and I cherished the emails from clients who valued my consulting not just for the reports, but for the observant operational wisdom I brought from the front lines. My late-night business plan, once a document that smelled of desperate fantasy, began to shed its naivete. Its pages were now filled with hard data, supplier quotes, and a floor plan that I had drawn myself. It was no longer a dream. It was a blueprint. 2 years of small, steady steps, freelance gigs that meticulously padded my savings, a prudent and hard-won loan, a partnership offer from my old professor who had watched my blueprint solidify into a viable prospect. All of it culminated in a single offer letter that made my hands tremble as I held it. The owner of the very restaurant where my parents had made me a spectacle was ready to retire. He wasn't just looking for a financier. He needed someone who understood both the unyielding logic of the ledger and the living, breathing pulse of the dining room. I knew the place. I had memorized the scuff mark near the service station, the particular groan of the floorboard by table 9, the way the evening light fell through the west window. I had been part of its heartbeat, and now, against every expectation they ever held for me, I had the money. The closing on the property was the quiet kind of victory, the sort that happens in a sunlit boardroom with bitter coffee, the soft scratch of pens, and numbers on a page that look less like figures and more like futures. I refused to make a scene. I rejected any notion of revenge dressed in the gaudy clothes of humiliation. That was their currency, not mine. Instead, I signed the papers, hired back every staff member I respected, and set to work building something that truly mattered to me, a sanctuary of efficiency and grace, a place where anyone who crossed the threshold, server, cook, guest, would be held to the same unspoken standard of fundamental dignity. On the night my parents celebrated their 30th anniversary in the same opulent room, I did not arrive in an apron. I wore a tailored charcoal suit and a polished steel nameplate that read, simply, Maya Lin, owner. I walked into Bella Vista not with the hot, rushing triumph that screams for attention, but with the quiet, sure step of someone who has been beneath the floorboards and now knows the weight and the creak of every single one.
They looked up as I approached their table, their laughter cutting off abruptly, making their circle suddenly painfully loud in the restaurant's haze of polite murmurs. My mother's face flushed the deep, mortified color of a forgotten wine stain on linen. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his temple, as he swallowed whatever first foolish word came to his mind. He opened his mouth, then closed it, a man whose punchline had just been rewritten. For a single, suspended beat, I considered announcing the purchase like a headline, delivering the final, crushing blow. But that would have made me his daughter in that moment, and I had worked too hard to become my own creator. Instead, I placed two heavy, leather-bound menus on the table, leaned in with a calm that felt like power, and said, my voice just for them, "Welcome back. I hope you enjoy the evening." They sputtered through denials, a chorus of fractured sentences. "You couldn't possibly have," my father began, his voice strangled. "We didn't invite you," my mother finished, her whisper sharp with panic. I simply bypassed them, turning to each of their wide-eyed guests with a polished, professional smile and a firm handshake, pressing my business card into their palms. Owner. Executive Director. The card was a small, heavy-stocked rectangle, but it represented the weight of long, silent nights, of relentless thrift, of the steady, bone-deep refusal to let their appraisal of me become my own. When the guests were distracted by the impeccable service, I turned back to my parents. "You called me a fraud," I said, my voice low, the words not meant to humiliate, but to mark, once and for all, the chasm between their fiction and my truth. "You thought my work was pretend, a costume." I let my gaze sweep the room, the glowing ambiance, the seamless ballet of the staff, the satisfied murmur that was the sound of a thriving business. I was building this. My father, grasping for a narrative he could still control, tried to insist I used hidden family money or a shadowy backer they didn't know. His indignation was a flimsy, final defense, and I let it fall around him like the exhausted sigh of a finished service, having no power to touch me anymore. I held the ultimate power in that moment, the power of banishment. I could have had them escorted out, severing the final tie with a single, sharp-sheared command, but that would have been their kind of victory, a dramatic scene. Instead, I let them eat. I watched as the staff I had personally trained moved through the courses like a well-drilled team, their grace a silent testament to my leadership. I listened to the room breathe around my parents' stunned silence, the low hum of contented guests, the melodic clink of crystal, the sounds of a world I had built, functioning perfectly without their permission. Their silence was a different kind of verdict, and for the first time, it did not wound me. It taught me the final lesson, that dignity is not a title bestowed by others. It is a structure you build for yourself, brick by stubborn brick, with the mortar of your own labor. Later, after their celebration had ended under the weight of this new reality, the lights were dimmed and the last dessert plate cleared. My manager, the same man who had once defended my right to simply be an employee, found me and clapped a warm, fatherly hand on my shoulder. He said, "You did good, Maya," his voice rough with sincerity. That was enough. It was everything. If you have ever been dismissed by the very people who were supposed to lift you up, remember this: the quiet strategy will always outlast the loud triumph. Work in the places others look down on. Learn from the ground up. Save relentlessly. Build something tangible. And when the time is right, invite them to the table. Not so they can taste the bitterness of revenge, but so they can finally, silently, behold the substance of everything they ever refused to see.